So our question today comes from James V, who says, I'm a college student who's relatively new to political discourse. I've always considered myself to be on the left, but I don't understand why the left in general is so, quote, soft on crime. I get that the left wants to help people who may have been driven to crime by unfortunate circumstances, but I do not see how being kinder to criminals helps society at large. I also feel like it's a weird hill to die on for a movement that wants to accomplish so many other good things. So why are so many people on the left so focused on things like defunding the police and letting criminals out of prison? So first of all, hey James, this is a very good question that a lot of people have about leftist policy, and I think it does a really good job of highlighting what I consider to be one of the left's branding problems. Far too often, us leftist creators and leftist politicians and pundits, we tend to justify our policy positions using emotional arguments. And there's nothing wrong with emotional arguments. They can be effective at changing minds, but most of the time it's more used as a rallying cry for people who already support our position. I'm not going to lie, that helps get clicks, but it also can open up our policies to unwarranted attacks about how they're unrealistic, even if they are the more realistic policy. In the case of crime prevention, you have people making arguments about how it's wrong to lock people up, how certain communities are unfairly over-policed, and how prisons and law enforcement in general treats criminals inhumanely. And while all of this is true, it often overshadows the data-driven reasoning behind these policies, and it allows the right to paint us as bleeding heart liberals who are soft on crime. But here's the thing, the left is generally soft on criminals, but not soft on crime. In fact, the reason we support policies that are seen as soft on criminals is because we are so much harder on crime. We are the ones who support policies which have been proven to reduce crime. That is what we ultimately care about. Helping people who are placed in unfortunate circumstances is just an added bonus of these policies. It's the right who cares more about how we treat criminals than they do about actually reducing crime. So first of all, there's this common misconception in America that wrongdoing requires punishment. And that is the end of the line of reasoning for many people. They believe that if you commit a crime, you simply deserve punishment. And I'm sure there are a lot of people listening to me right now who are nodding their heads in agreement. And if you're one of those people, I want to ask you one simple question. Why? Why do you think people who commit crimes deserve to be punished? Is it because your idea of justice requires vengeance? Do you think that there's some universal moral law that makes it necessary for criminals to be punished in the same way that gravity makes it necessary for objects to fall to the ground? If that's the case, then you probably will never get behind leftist criminal justice policy because you care more about how we treat criminals than you do about how the way we treat them affects their likelihood of committing more crime. But if you're like me and you think the point of punishing criminals is to reduce crime, well, then listen up because you're about to understand why leftist policy better accomplishes that goal. The first thing to understand right now is that the United States is extremely tough on criminals. We hold over 2 million people in prison, which accounts for 20% of the entire global prison population. We have the highest incarceration rates of every country on Earth. Not every peer country, not every industrialized nation, every country on Earth. So, is this tough on criminals approach working? Well, to put it simply, no. Our crime rates and violent crime rates are among the highest of our peer nations. Our murder rate is 4.96 per 100,000 people, which ranks embarrassingly high for being the richest country on Earth. To put how bad that murder rate is into perspective, the murder rates of our peer nations like Canada, the UK, and France are all less than 2 per 100,000. Again, ours is nearly 5. And to make matters worse, our recidivism rate of 46% is near the worst in the world. For those who don't know, a recidivism rate measures the percentage of people who are released from prison who end up back in prison within 5 years, which means that nearly half the people who go to prison in this country just end up right back there sooner or later. Now, let's compare this to a country like Norway. In Norway, they implement the kind of rehabilitative criminal justice system that many leftists advocate for. Many of their prisons don't even confine prisoners to cells. Instead, they allow them to roam free around the prison, provide them with educational opportunities to advance their learning. They allow them to cook and clean and grow food for themselves. They don't even force them to wear a jumpsuit or anything, instead electing to allow them to wear street clothes while in prison. So why does Norway choose to run its prisons this way? Because they're just some bleeding heart liberals? Well, no, it's because it works. Norway's recidivism rates are just 20%, which means that our system of punishing criminals instead of rehabilitating them is not just ineffective, it is actively causing more people to commit crimes, at least when compared to more rehabilitative systems. And I know this is going to seem counterintuitive to many Americans, but it really shouldn't if you think about the way you respond to punishment. When you're growing up and your parents, your teachers, your coaches didn't want you to do something, what was more effective at stopping you from doing that thing? Harsh punishments used purely for deterrence, or just punishments that included lessons about why your actions were wrong and more effective solutions to the problems that you were trying to solve with those actions? I, for one, know that harsh punishments with no justification didn't stop me from breaking the rules. It just made me work harder to not get caught when I did. So once I was ungrounded or whatever, I would just go back and break the rules again in a smarter way. All harsh punishment does is provide a reason to avoid getting punished. It doesn't address the root causes of the inappropriate action. Which brings us to the other side of the leftist crime-fighting strategy. The way we punish criminals is not nearly as important as what we do to stop them from becoming criminals in the first place. After all, that's the entire point here, right? There are many reasons to reduce police spending, but one of the most important is that police spending doesn't really reduce crime. Looking at historical data, when cities increase their police budget, there's only a 50-50 shot that this will be followed by a reduction in crime, meaning that if your goal is to reduce crime, then increasing police spending isn't going to do anything for you. And again, this should make intuitive sense when you realize that police mostly just respond to crime that has already happened. There's not actually much they can do to actively prevent it. The left doesn't view cops as individuals out there fighting crime, but just part of a system whose goal is crime reduction. And the left doesn't look at crime as something individuals do, which needs to be punished. We look at it as a systemic failure to provide more productive solutions to the problems that people face, and we take collective responsibility to fix those problems. After all, criminals aren't born criminals. They're made to be criminals by the material conditions that surround them. There's a reason you don't have high rates of violent crime and property theft in wealthy neighborhoods. It's not because simply not committing crimes makes you wealthy. If it does, then hey, Uncle Sam, I'm still waiting for my check in the mail. It's because poverty drives you to commit more crime. This is why leftists advocate for policy which reduces poverty. It doesn't just help people, it's also a crime-fighting technique. These policies include things like universal healthcare, education, and childcare, making food a human right, universal basic income, public housing options, and public infrastructure investment, to name a few. All of these things reduce poverty rates, which in turn reduces the numerous factors which cause people to commit crime, and therefore reduces crime rates more than any tough-on-crime conservative policy ever will. Now, we on the left need to do a better job of explaining these things. We shouldn't be getting questions about why we're soft on crime when we clearly aren't. For example, we say all cops are bastards even though they clearly aren't. Most of them are genuinely trying to improve their communities. Most of the Americans who back the blue out there aren't our enemies. They're just confused as to why we don't, because they genuinely think that police provide an effective solution to crime. Our job is not to shame them for being fascists, but to educate them as to why our solutions are more effective at solving the problems that they genuinely face.